Hi everyone, welcome. So we have this room until 1:20, and I know a number of you have to leave to go to class at 1. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to very briefly introduce our guest speaker. Now the format of today's program is she's going to give a short talk, and then we'll open up the forum to questions from all of you so that we can engage in a discussion. So I am very grateful to the Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs and the Women in the Law program here at WCL for putting together this event and bringing us this delicious lunch. So without further ado, this is Hidayah, who is the Executive Director of Migrant Care, which is a non-governmental organization in Jakarta, Indonesia, devoted to monitoring and promoting the rights of Indonesian migrant workers. She is the 2011 recipient of the Human Rights Watch Alison Award, which used to be known as the Human Rights Watch Monitors Award, which is awarded to amazing human rights advocates around the world each year. I mean, it includes Nobel Peace Prize winners. So it's a tremendous honor, and we are so lucky to be able to have her join us today and give us her thoughts about the incredible work that she does in Indonesia on behalf of migrant workers. Anise first developed an interest in migrant workers' rights during grad school when she learned of a female migrant worker in Saudi Arabia who had been raped and had no recourse available to her. And so she took that on this whole issue as a cause and established the East Java Women's Solidarity Movement, which is dedicated to empowering migrant workers. She has also organized several migrant workers' rights protests and drawn the attention of both the press and influential Indonesian policymakers to this important issue. I also want to take a moment to welcome Nisha Varia, who is sitting right here up front, who is from Human Rights Watch. She has done, for any of you who have done research on domestic workers' rights, Nisha Varia is the guru in this issue, having produced so many reports, researched and written so many incredibly good reports on migrant domestic workers' rights around the world. So we are very privileged to have Nisha join us as well today. So without further ado, I present to you Hidayah, who, like I said, will speak for a few minutes, and then we'll open up the session to questions from all of you. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to you. Oh, and before I do that, this is a gift from WCL for our speakers. So thank you for coming. All right, so I will turn this over to you. And if you're more comfortable sitting there, you can sit or stand.
Thank you. Thank you for joining and coming for this meeting. I'm glad to be here. I will talking a little bit about the situation of human rights violations faced by Indonesian migrant workers in many different countries, and in the context of how my government, Indonesian government, responds with this issue. In Indonesia, poverty is a big problem because of poverty. It's about 25 million of Indonesian people's no job. Women have emerged as breadwinners in their families, but there are no opportunity for women to work. Those that are available are for women from the Middle East and up, so they have no choice, and going abroad is an alternative. Currently, there are almost 7 million migrant workers from Indonesia, and almost 6 million are women and work as domestic workers in many different countries who are vulnerable to exploitation and subject to human rights abuses, from the recruitment process right through their return from their home from abroad. Domestic workers excluded from labor law in Indonesia and also in many different countries. They have no guarantees for working hours, day off, minimum wage, social protection, and right to organize. Their work without rest, passport is taken, maybe not be paid, and maybe eaten. In Indonesia, recruiters or middlemen almost come and find women and villages. They promises a better life, bringing some photograph of migrant workers' houses who have the money and build new house. When women decide to go abroad and leave their babies, before they go to abroad, they locked in training center up to 6 months. And they should pay much money for recruiting fee through salary deduction up to 6 months on the starting of their 2 years. That means 2 years contract get the salary after 6 months. Why I concern in this issue? Because I come from a poor village in Java, in East Java in Indonesia, where more than half the people are migrant workers. There are only a few women left in my village. The rest have all left for work. I was lucky my parents didn't go abroad to work, but I know there are so many children who do not even know their mothers. They are raised by their grandmothers. I was get involved in this work since 1998 when I read about Indonesian women raped in Saudi Arabia by her employer. And on 2004, I founded Migrant Care for human rights activities. I have seen how such abuses affect all women in my community. And I wanted to make a difference. Since then, Migrant Care has monitored thousands of cases. In the media and in cooperation with other organizations, we have made sure the migrants do not suffer in silence. Migrant Care has monitored thousands of cases. We pressure my government to speak out on this issue and also my president, SBY, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, to speak out this issue. They did, but there is not enough yet. Like in Malaysia, the receiving countries of migrant workers, there are about 2.4 million Indonesian migrant workers there, and around 400,000 there are domestic workers. Between two countries, Indonesia and Malaysia, actually we have an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, on 2006 about domestic workers. But this really crazy Memorandum of Understanding. Why? Because this MOU legalized for employer to keep the passport of Indonesian domestic workers. And there is no guarantees for working hours and some rights of domestic workers. And after pressure and research for almost 5 years, Indonesia planned to sending domestic workers to Malaysia since 2 years ago. And this year, the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, revised with new protection, 1 day off, and also passport should not be taken by employer. And on the 1st December this year, we'll start again to sending Indonesian domestic workers, but we feel that not really improved for the protection. Migrant care also provided legal assistance and advice for migrant workers. They can call us every time and also call me when they need assessment, legal assessment and also advisory. Even when I was 9 months pregnant, and when I was having labor, I received calls from migrant workers. And I cannot ignore the calls because I feel that, yeah, they was in the suffer situation. This year, there is a landmark new treaty. There are the first global labor standards for domestic workers, giving workers recognition and legal protection against abuses. In the beginning, many governments opposed it, including Indonesia and also so many receiving countries like Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Singapore, and many countries in Middle East. But after years of research, I think Human Rights Watch research published and public pressure, the treaty had overwhelming support. So we call this new regime for domestic workers. I have 2 daughters myself. One is 3 months old and one is 6 years old. I want my children to grow up in the world where women's work is treated with respect. Thank you for listening.
Do you have questions from the audience? Misha? Or did you want to?
Well, I just thought I've worked with Anis for 8 years now, and just to give you a sense of some of the impact of her work. You know, 6 or 7 years ago, this was an issue that was truly ignored by the media, by government officials, and now this is something that is in the Indonesian papers almost every day, and usually they're quoting Anis. This is also something where now when there are abuse cases against Indonesian domestic workers in Malaysia and Saudi Arabia, the Indonesian government has felt the pressure to respond. And so there are, you know, as Anis was saying, statements made by the President of Indonesia about these abuse cases, sending delegations at the ministerial level to Saudi Arabia, and just to say a lot of this is really due to the pressure by the Indonesian groups on the ground. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Great. Did you?
Yeah, well, I was curious about statistics, so which were the top receiving countries, and also, do you have any figures on the percentage of Indonesia's, like, GDP that is coming from money sent back home from these migrant workers?
Yeah, currently there are almost 40 receiving countries for Indonesian migrant workers, and the biggest one is Malaysia. As I mentioned before, there are around 2.5 million Indonesian migrant workers there and work in various sectors: domestic workers, construction, plantation, public services, and money sectors. And the second is Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, there are around 1.5 million and almost domestic workers, 90% domestic workers, and all women. Last year, the remittance from migrant workers that contribute to our national economy very fantastic, 7.1 million US dollars. Billion, I mean, billion. Yes, sorry.
Yes. My question was, you've obviously had wonderful success in Indonesia advocating for workers. What advice or ideas or tips do you have for workers in the U.S. that are working to protect domestic workers here? Like for us to advocate for workers who are here.
Yeah, I think Human Rights Watch monitor and have the research about this issue. And for United States, I still remember that a few years ago, 2 Indonesian domestic workers become victim of human trafficking in which country? In Long Island. In Long Island, become treated by her employer, beaten, no paid, and no rest, and no food every day, and but they get justice because maybe yeah, if United States not respond with this issue, I think will yeah, political effect internationally is very bad. So this issue responds well by United States, and United States have a big concern about human trafficking, and yearly also make a report, including also Indonesia, almost always going down the tier in the ranking because of poor in the implementation, how to prevent people in Indonesia, mostly women, to go abroad and save from human trafficking. And for United States, yeah, how to improve and how to increase the cooperation between civil society organizations and also media. It's very important thing because the freedom of press in Indonesia and also in everywhere, it will a big role how to make difference, how to make change with the situation of migrant workers and of human trafficking, to go out from silence, because domestic workers is in private sector, in houses of employer. Everyone cannot monitor every day what happened inside, so it's very important how to always almost pressure cooperation with many media in national level and international level to make public awareness about with this issue and make the government speak out in Indonesia, in receiving countries, and also United States government.
Isha, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to give some details on Anissa's point about the importance of media, Migrant Care has really been very savvy with the media, and so often they'll have demonstrations where they reenact some of the abuses, and they do that in front of the embassies of countries where these abuses are taking place. And it's often so hard to get the media to cover this issue, but they've had tremendous success in making this something that's visual, that grabs people's attention, and that's shocking, and that's not exaggerating what's happening. I mean, these are actually what is happening. So that's been a strategy that's been really interesting. I don't know, are there any other particularly like successful strategies that you think have worked really well for migrant care?
Yeah, we have the number of the cell number of labor minister, human empowerment minister, and also foreign minister, and we give that number for migrant workers to send directly the message if they face problem, you know, and yeah, because they should know directly what happened with migrant workers. If just hear from migrant care, even if they say that migrant care always make a bit noisy in media, just how to make profile in public or media. But if we give the number of the important government officials to migrant workers, and they send the message directly, they will know that what happened in the ground that faced by Indonesian migrant workers is very dangerous.
I just I appreciated your presentation, and I have a question about your last point. I'm curious to know a little bit more about how you involve the migrant workers themselves in your advocacy, and kind of what your vision or strategy is for organizing the workers, if that's part of your work, and how you do that given that the workers spend much of the year out of Indonesia. How you're reaching out to the workers and trying to perhaps build a collective voice for them.
Yeah, in the start it's very difficult way how to organize migrant workers, especially domestic workers, because they no guarantees access to communicate. One day off, it's very difficult. But during migrant camps, have a cooperation with the radio stations, Dutch Welle in Germany. I have many times interview with this station, and this radio can access by Indonesian migrant workers in Saudi Arabia. We have interactive dialogue with migrant workers there, that they run away from their employer house. They make report, and I always mention my cell number, migrant care official number, email, Facebook, Twitter, and every day in my Facebook, in my inbox of my Facebook, there are always messages from abroad about migrant workers from different countries. Also in my Twitter, and also my cell phone. This is the important thing that I have, because through this cell, I can directly help anyone of Indonesian people that work abroad from dangerous situation. When I receive the text from migrant workers, and then I just deliver and forward the message to Indonesian embassy in anywhere, and then I also always write CC to Labor Minister and Jakarta Post, but actually I'm not send the message to Labor Minister or Jakarta Post just to pressure to Indonesian embassy to quick response with the case, because if not, I think we will know will increase the number of death of migrant workers in Saudi Arabia, especially because that's a very difficult country, you know. And sorry, just add a short. And we also organize the former and then
they connect with their friend in abroad, in different countries. It's interesting because they have the same field, they have the same experiences, so they can exchange experience and then become survivor, how to help others and solidarity.
Has there been a more widespread emigration of whole families from Indonesia as well in the past decade or so, along with the migrant workers? Has that been a increasing issue as well, as kind of the population is increasing and there might be more pressure on the land resources in Indonesia, especially in the big cities, for jobs and...
Yeah, like in Malaysia, we see that there are so many villages that almost migrant, Indonesian migrant workers. Not only one, but in the one house there are a family, father, mother, son, girl, and so many villages containing of Indonesian migrant workers. And we cannot find it in the other countries, just in Malaysia, because you know we have a close border between Indonesia and Malaysia. Just go by boat and around 7 hours, and also by airplane just 1 hour to go to Malaysia. And we have also similar culture with Malaysia. So why the migration to Malaysia is different model, different pola. So yeah, pattern. I mean a different pattern with other countries. One family, two family, big family. All of them migrate to Malaysia and live then for a long time and make like villages and some peoples in the village almost Indonesian peoples.
And if I can just add to that, so you have that pattern in Malaysia because of the border, but a lot of the immigration policies in the receiving countries for domestic workers, so in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Singapore, they specifically say that domestic workers have to come on their own, they're not allowed to bring their families. So it's these immigration regimes which are really forcing these splits in families, and also they go as far as saying you also cannot marry anybody while you're working here, you cannot become pregnant while you're working here.
I have two questions actually. The first was when migrant workers contact you and attempt to bring light to their case, is there any backlash where they work from their employers, or as your organization gains more prominence, have employers fought back in a bad way in terms of creating more and more abuses? And then the second question was, one way to deal with this problem and the abuses is through advocacy and what you're doing. And I was wondering if you were trying at all to change sort of the system and the start of the problem, where because there is so much poverty and there's there are very few options for women in their own community to work and to gain a resource, if that factored at all into the work that Migrant Care does.
Dari majikan, dari adukan,
Yeah, migrant care always receive treat many times institutionally and also myself personally, but not from employer. Yeah, maybe from government, I think. My government, Indonesian government. You know, on 2004, during we monitored about the deportation of undocumented migrant workers from Malaysia. The whole data of migrant camps stolen, many computers and everything about data stolen and no legal process in Indonesia. And our website 2 times cracked by someone, and our email also hacked by someone and sending the bad information about migrant care to government, to our colleague NGOs and some migrant workers also. And I'm personally also received threat. Also my husband, threat. I mean threat. Correct my word because false. Yeah, many times, many emails distribute from we don't know someone that call me as sex workers, you know, and everyone can call me with my really shell number, and this information not just released in Indonesia but also in Malaysia, in Singapore. So I received many message from someone asked me to be sex workers in some hotels in Indonesia. And just a month ago also, yeah, someone distribute my photos with no clothes. Maybe they create by themselves to make terror with my family to stop this work. And also my husband threat always receive call and ask my husband, please tell to your wife to stop and do not pressure more about this issue because you have doctor. And also my mother in village, in my own village, received the same threat from anyone. But I think I ignore. Why? Because the situation of domestic workers in everyone more dangerous than my security. I feel that I and my family will protect it well with public protected, with my with domestic workers or migrant domestic workers support. I think we never fear with our struggle, our advocacy in migrant care. Yeah, the basic problems regarding with migration of migration issue in Indonesia is poverty and no job opportunity. That's why we also pressure our government how to create a job opportunity for not only for the middle and class and up class women, but also for women that who have a lack education in some villages in Indonesia. without this, I think every year the number of Indonesian women who abroad always increase, and the problem always increase parallel with the number that's always increase every time.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that this year MOU between Malaysia and government was signed, but I came across some articles saying that the inflow of Indonesian migrant workers is still suspended. So what improvements would you like to see in the MOU between these countries, and what do you think necessary to see such improvement?
Yeah. About the MOU, it's also very difficult, yeah, because Indonesian internally have no national regulation to protect domestic workers, so this become our barriers to negotiate with other countries like Malaysia. Indonesia always ask Malaysia to protect, to regulate, and to guarantee Indonesian domestic workers there about working hours, about minimum wage, about 1 day off, about right to organize and social protection. Yes, this human rights yes, this mandate of my constitution, but it's very difficult because Malaysia also asks again to Indonesia, if you really protect the domestic workers in Indonesia with protection and guarantees of their 1 day off, wages, and right to organize, social protection. Yeah, but I think under after pressure and research, and I remember the Human Rights Watch research about Malaysia. Malaysia more open to dialogue and negotiate with Indonesia about the revise of the MOU. And yeah, a little bit change and improvement, only about 1 day off, and passport should not taken by the employer. But we feel that this not really enough yet, because we need the comprehensive guarantee how Indonesian domestic workers in Malaysia can get their rights, their basic rights, not only to also rights to organize, also minimum wage, also social guarantee, and also rights to communicate with their family. So I think we still huge, and we still more pressure with Indonesia and Malaysia's country to revise again with comprehensive proposal.
Thank you very much for talking to us. I'm curious, there have been cases of abuse of Indonesian workers outside of Malaysia and Saudi Arabia. I'm thinking of a case in Colorado where a Saudi Arabian man abused an Indonesian domestic worker, and I'm wondering if those international incidents have influenced or helped your cause, if you're able to use an incident that happens in America to put pressure on Saudi Arabia with awareness at a higher level, and how that has helped you or not.
Yeah, I think Saudi is a rich country, have oils, and difficult how to face Saudi Arabia. But yeah, it's important how to ask United States to pressure Saudi Arabia with this issue. Yeah, because like Saudi Arabia also member of UN Human Rights Council, it's important thing how to pressure Saudi, how to protect migrant workers as human being, because under pressure of international media and United States and maybe other country in Europe, I think will be help us how to face Saudi. And the second strategy, I think, how to make cooperation or alliance between Indonesia, Philippines, Cambodia, and some sending countries to make platform together to make one standard to face Saudi. Maybe every country can ban sending domestic workers to Saudi Arabia, and this may be good idea how to face Saudi Arabia. Maybe Nisha can add.
Just with some of the cases that have happened in Colorado or in Long Island, it has been helpful to say, as an example, in both of those cases that an abusive employer was prosecuted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. And when these abuses are happening in Saudi Arabia or Malaysia, that's not often the case. And so, you know, when we can, to point to examples where the criminal justice system has worked in favor is useful.
Yeah, actually, not everyone in Indonesia aware with this issue, right? Because we have so many provinces in Indonesia, and the media cannot access by everyone in Indonesia, and also almost busy with their work maybe. And you know how the middleman or the recruiter working very hard in some villages in Indonesia to promises every women to go abroad with their success story from some former of Indonesian migrant domestic workers. And the story about the abuses of migrant workers in some media, yeah, sometimes affect with the number that migrant workers go abroad. I hope you can understand my speak. So sorry with my English. Maybe I will talk in Indonesia. Banyak kasus memang di angkat Indonesia, tapi tidak otomatis
So, although there are many cases were brought in the media, but this doesn't give direct impact to the sending of the domestic workers overseas? Because they know they are poor, and so they prefer to take risk to go. And also the recruiters are working very hard in order to recruit those domestic workers because they get profit from the recruitment.
Dan pemerintah juga secara legal menjadikan TKI sebagai solusi kemiskinan.
And also the Indonesian government does make sending domestic workers overseas as a legal way for the poverty solution.
Sayangnya memang dilindungi.
Yeah, unfortunately, the law enforcement is very weak and minimal. Also, the protection of the rights of the domestic workers are weak.
Dalam beberapa kasus memang sempat ada pengaruh.
In few cases, they do bring impact.
Seperti kasus Sumiati bulan sebelum ini.
For example, in the Sumiati case last November,
Dia disiksa, disiram panas, disetrika, bibirnya dipotong.
so she was abused, she was ironed, and then her lips were cut. She suffered from depression, and then she needed long-term care in the hospital. First, the employer was punished, but then they were released. And for 3 months after that incident, there was a vacuum. No one would like to go to Saudi Arabia. And also the recruiters admitted that it was very hard for them to find new recruitments. And then because of the urging of many sides, the government took decision not to send the domestic workers starting August 1st this year.
Tapi sebelum itu terjadi, bulan Juli, Arab sudah menyetop Indonesia tidak boleh.
But before Indonesia issued that decision, the Saudi government took a more quicker decision not to recruit Indonesian domestic workers. So they acted quicker.
You mentioned earlier the possibility of, or greater possibility for coordination between sending countries, and I was wondering, to what extent does your group coordinate with other groups from sending countries?
There are two cooperations that can be nurtured. One in the level of government, one in the level of civil society. So the civil societies from these countries, Indonesia, Philippines, and Cambodia, they work together Okay, so those three countries work together in order to face the ban from Arab Saudi.
Maybe you can talk about some of the work Migrant Care does with Migrant Forum in Asia and ASEAN.
Yeah, actually in ASEAN region, Migrant Care with Migrant Forum in Asia. Migrant Forum in Asia is the network of civil society organizations in Asia, almost 100 organizations there. Engage the ASEAN process, how to protect migrant workers. And 4 years ago, ASEAN have the Declaration on the Protection of Migrant Workers and have ASEAN Committee of Migrant Workers. And this committee have the mandate how to formulate the new instrument in ASEAN that legally binding to protect Indonesian, not only Indonesian, migrant workers in ASEAN. But you know, there are very difficult and stuck in the term of reference on two things. One thing about the protection for domestic workers, and the second about the protection for undocumented migrant workers. Malaysia and Singapore do not agree with the proposal that there are an ASEAN an instrument that protect and recognize domestic workers and undocumented migrant workers. Because you know, Malaysia in every year routine how to deport Indonesian undocumented workers with no fair trial, with no legal process before, and with no paid for their salary. And yeah, you know, we still pressure how this committee, ASEAN Committee of Migrant Workers, to do more hard to fight with Malaysia and Singapore, and to make sure that two countries agree with the proposal, and we have the new instrument in ASEAN that guarantee the protect migrant workers.
Any other questions? Yes.
I don't know how much support is about it, but my question is, has it been possible to create legal ways to make for migrant workers in Indonesia to go abroad? For example, maybe to create some kind of work contracts with the sending countries, or to cooperate with the embassy, and to make memorable visas for long terms. Because I imagine it's very hard to get visa, for example, to the US, but once they get it, it's only for 6 months or for 1 year. But I think if it will be for longer, for 2 years, many more people will come back home.
According to the law, the contract for the migrant workers are for 2 years. And then that can be extended with the embassies of Indonesia's overseas. So up to now, it is still being implemented, but also
Bagaimana apakah akan ada perubahan atau gimana tadi bilangnya peran undang akan diapakan, akan diperbaiki, akan ditingkatkan.
and this this regulation is being improved in order to create a better contract.
Do you have any question? Alicia, did you want to ask? Well, I just wanted to take advantage of a captive audience to just bring your attention to the ILO Convention on Domestic Work, which was adopted this year. I think there's a lot of really interesting and very exciting things about it. One is that, there's a lot of ILO conventions, but this was something that everyone came to feel was really going back to some fundamentals of protections that should have been extended to this huge sector of the workforce 50 years ago. This isn't about tweaking some aspect of Social Security, but this was about some really fundamentals of labor protections. And two things are interesting. One are the content of these standards, that they're very strong standards. And there were a lot of issues that come up in national debates about protecting domestic workers, such as, well, how much can you compensate, how much of their salary can be for their room and board, or can you really regulate the hours of somebody who's living inside the house? What about inspections of private homes? And despite how controversial those debates are at the national level, at the international level, after very intense negotiations, there are some very strong protections in there, including specific protections for migrant workers who make up a lot of domestic workers. And what's exciting is that if you look at the UN Migrant Worker Convention, it has suffered a lot of credibility issues because it's mainly been countries that send migrants abroad that have ratified it, but countries that receive migrants haven't ratified it, so it's not been seen as very effective. The ILO Convention on Domestic Work looks like it's going to be ratified very widely. There's already kind of a competition to see who's going to ratify it first. Countries that want to be seen as leaders on the world stage. So Brazil, South Africa, Brazil, and the Philippines are all hoping to ratify it first, but very importantly, we have EU states that are planning to ratify. So Belgium has announced that it is planning to ratify. Norway, which isn't EU, but a European state and a receiving state, is planning to ratify. But the other thing that's exciting about it is how the process was much more transparent because it was a tripartite process, having labor unions, employers, and governments all at the table negotiating together. So it was transparent. Everyone has a lot of buy-in into the convention. And like 3 years ago, it was really domestic workers groups in different countries kind of scattered that were working on this issue. But because of this process, you now have trade unions, which, in many cases are male-dominated, have never had domestic workers as members, having been hugely sensitized to this issue and forming alliances with domestic workers groups. And in the coming year, 40 national trade unions are going to be making domestic work as their campaigns. So it's a really exciting time for the domestic worker movement because there are now global labor standards, there's a recognition, and there's this growing movement with really influential actors. So I encourage all of you to get involved.
Any other comments, questions? I think that's a great note to end on, this hopeful note about where we are, because it is a really exciting time for migrant domestic workers' rights with the ILO Convention, and also domestically, we're legislation in New York and hopefully in California. So it's a time of transition. It's a moment that we've arrived at that many people like Anise and others have really built the foundation for getting to this point where people are taking this issue seriously, and we're starting to see really substantive legal reforms taking place. So we'll end this session with a hopeful note, and a huge thanks to Anise for taking the time to come visit us and share with us her experiences and her expertise, and Tanisha as well for her incredible work. in this field generally, and for shepherding Anis through this, and our interpreter, who's indispensable. And thank you to all of you for coming and taking time out of your busy schedules to come listen. So thank you very much, everyone.